The longhouse of Jarl Magnus stood like a wooden fortress against the harsh Norwegian winter, its smoke rising into the grey sky of the year 874. Inside, the great hall buzzed with the sounds of warriors sharing ale and tales of their latest raids across the northern seas. Among them sat Bjorn Ironwolf, a man whose reputation with sword and axe had earned him a place at the Jarl's table, though his heart belonged elsewhere. Astrid moved through the hall with the grace of a deer, her golden hair braided with silver threads that caught the firelight. She was not Bjorn's wife, for he had none, but she had shared his bed and his hearth for 3 long winters. The daughter of a lesser chieftain who had fallen in battle, she had chosen the protection of the fierce warrior over the uncertainty of seeking another husband among the scattered clans. Their arrangement was known to all in the settlement. Astrid tended to Bjorn's household, mended his clothes torn in battle, and warmed his furs during the coldest nights. In return, he provided for her, defended her honor, and gave her a status that many unmarried women could never hope to achieve. Yet she remained unmarried, free to leave if she chose, though bound to him by affection and mutual need. Tonight, however, something had changed in her demeanor. Bjorn noticed how she avoided his gaze as she served the mead, how her usual smile seemed forced when she laughed at the other warriors' jokes. When she finally approached his bench, her green eyes held a seriousness that made his stomach tighten with foreboding. "Walk with me," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. "The moon is bright, and I would speak with you away from listening ears." Bjorn rose from his place, ignoring the knowing glances of his companions. He wrapped his thick woolen cloak around his shoulders and followed Astrid out into the crisp night air. Snow crunched beneath their leather boots as they walked toward the edge of the settlement, where the wooden palisade met the dark forest beyond. "You have been distant these past days," Bjorn said, his voice carrying the weight of concern. "Tell me what troubles you, woman. Have I not provided well? Have I dishonored you in some way?" Astrid stopped walking and turned to face him, her face pale in the moonlight. "You have been good to me, Bjorn. Better than I deserved, perhaps. But I cannot continue as we have been." The words hit him like a blow from a warhammer. "What do you mean?" "Jarl Erik of the Eastern Fjords has asked for my hand in marriage," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "His first wife died in childbirth this past summer, and he seeks another to manage his household and bear him sons. He has offered a generous bride price to my cousin, who speaks for my family now." Bjorn felt the blood drain from his face. Erik was a powerful man, older than Bjorn by 15 winters, with extensive lands and a large warband. More importantly, he could offer Astrid something Bjorn never had, the security and status of legal marriage. "And you wish to accept?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from the pain in her eyes. "I am 23 winters old, Bjorn. I have no children, no family of my own. What will become of me when you tire of me, or when you decide to take a proper wife? I cannot remain your mistress forever." Her words were logical, practical, everything a Viking woman needed to be to survive in their harsh world. Yet they cut through him like a blade. He had grown comfortable in their arrangement, never considering that she might want more than he was prepared to give. "I have been happy with you," he said finally. "These 3 years have been the best of my life." "And mine," she replied, reaching out to touch his bearded cheek. "But happiness is not enough to secure a future. You know this as well as I do." They stood in silence for a long moment, both understanding that their time together was drawing to a close. In the distance, a wolf howled, its lonely call echoing across the snow-covered landscape, like a lament for what was about to be lost. The weeks following Astrid's revelation passed like a fever dream for Bjorn Ironwolf. He threw himself into his duties with renewed intensity, leading hunting parties into the frozen wilderness and training the younger warriors until they could barely lift their practice swords. Yet no amount of physical exertion could drive away the hollow feeling that had taken root in his chest. Astrid continued to share his bed, but their intimacy had changed. Where once they had laughed and whispered together in the darkness, now they lay side by side in careful silence, both knowing that each night might be their last together. She still performed her duties as his woman, cooking his meals and maintaining his household, but her movements carried the weight of someone already halfway gone. The entire settlement buzzed with talk of Jarl Erik's proposal. Messengers had arrived from the eastern fjords bearing gifts of silver arm rings, fine furs, and bolts of imported silk. Eric's offer was generous beyond what most women of Astrid's station could expect. He promised not only marriage but also adoption of any children she might bear, ensuring their inheritance rights in his substantial holdings. "The man knows how to make an offer," Magnus observed one evening as he and Bjorn shared ale by the great hearth. "Silver, status and security. What more could a woman want?" Bjorn said nothing, staring into the dancing flames. He had been avoiding such conversations for days, but Magnus was his Jarl and deserved an answer when he spoke directly. "You could make her a counteroffer," Magnus continued, his tone carefully neutral. "Marriage would solve her concerns about the future. Your reputation and skill would make you a worthy husband, even if your wealth cannot match Eric's." The suggestion hung in the air between them, like smoke from a badly tended fire. Bjorn had considered it, of course. During the long nights when sleep eluded him, he had imagined proposing to Astrid, offering her the security of marriage and the promise of children. Yet something always held him back. "I am not ready to be a husband," he admitted finally. "Not the kind she deserves. My heart still belongs to the sea and the sword. I cannot promise her that I would not grow restless, that I would not leave her behind when the spring raids begin." Magnus nodded slowly. "At least you are honest about it. Many men make promises they cannot keep, then wonder why their wives grow bitter." That same evening, Astrid found Bjorn sharpening his weapons in the small room they shared behind the main hall. The rhythmic scraping of whetstone against steel filled the silence between them as she sat on their shared bed, watching him work. "Eric's men leave tomorrow," she said quietly. "He expects an answer." Bjorn's hand paused in its motion, the half-sharpened sayax catching the lamplight. "And what will you tell them?" "What I must," she replied. "I have talked with the other women, sought counsel from those who have made similar choices. They all say the same thing. A woman must think of her future, not just her heart." He resumed his sharpening, though his movements had grown more aggressive. "And what does your heart say?" "My heart is a luxury I cannot afford." Her voice remained steady, but he could hear the pain beneath the practical words. "I love you, Bjorn. I have loved you for 3 winters, and I will carry that love with me wherever I go. But love does not fill empty bellies or provide shelter when the snows come." The truth of her words cut deeper than any blade he had ever faced in battle. She was right, and they both knew it. In their world, survival often trumped sentiment, and practical choices determined the difference between prosperity and poverty, between security and destitution. "When will you leave?" he asked, setting aside his weapon. "Within the fortnight. Eric wants the marriage ceremony performed before the harshest part of winter arrives. He has already sent word to the priest at Trondheim to prepare for our union." Bjorn stood and moved to the small window, gazing out at the star-filled sky. Somewhere beyond those stars lay Eric's lands, the place where Astrid would build a new life with another man. The thought made his jaw clench with an emotion he refused to name. "I will not ask you to stay," he said finally. "You deserve better than uncertainty." Behind him, he heard the rustle of fabric as she rose from the bed. Her hand touched his shoulder gently, and he felt the warmth of her body as she pressed close to his back. "Thank you," she whispered, "for understanding, for not making this harder than it already is." They held each other that night with desperate tenderness, both knowing that their time was measured now not in seasons or months, but in precious days that would soon be nothing more than memories. The morning of Astrid's departure dawned grey and cold, with thick clouds promising snow before evening. Bjorn had risen before first light, unable to sleep as the weight of finality pressed down upon him like stones in a burial mound. He stood at the edge of the settlement, watching Eric's men prepare their horses and sleds for the journey eastward. Jarl Eric had come himself to collect his bride, a gesture that spoke of both honour and possession. He was a tall man with greying hair and weathered features, his bearing commanding respect from all who saw him. His retinue of 20 warriors bore fine weapons and wore thick furs that spoke of wealth and status. Even Bjorn had to admit that Astrid would want for nothing in such a household. The formal ceremonies had been completed the previous evening in Magnus's hall. Eric had presented the bride price to Astrid's cousin, who had accepted on behalf of her deceased father's family. Astrid had received gifts of jewellery, fine cloth and silver that marked her new status as a Jarl's wife. She had worn a dress of deep blue wool, her hair braided in the intricate style of married women, and had spoken her acceptance with dignity that impressed even her former lover. Now, As the final preparations were made, Bjorn found himself unable to approach her directly. He had said his private farewell the night before, holding her close as they both wept silently in the darkness of their shared room. To make a public scene now would dishonor them both and create unnecessary drama for the entire settlement. "She looks well," Magnus observed, appearing at Bjorn's side. "Erik treats her with proper respect. She will be safe in his household." Bjorn nodded, not trusting his voice. Astrid stood near the largest sled, wrapped in a magnificent fur cloak that Erik had given her. She was speaking quietly with some of the other women who had come to see her off, accepting their good wishes and promises to remember her in their prayers. Her face showed composure, but Bjorn knew her well enough to see the carefully controlled emotion in her green eyes. "You should speak with her before she leaves," Magnus continued. "A proper farewell between friends. It would be strange if you did not." The suggestion made sense, and Bjorn forced himself to walk across the courtyard toward the travelling party. Erik noticed his approach and nodded respectfully, understanding the complicated situation without judgment. In their culture, such arrangements were common enough that no shame attached to any of the parties involved. "Bjorn Ironwolf," Erik said formally, "I thank you for the care you have shown my wife during her time of need. Your protection honored her family's memory." "She is a woman of great worth," Bjorn replied, choosing his words carefully. "You are fortunate to have gained such a bride." Astrid turned at the sound of their conversation, her eyes meeting Bjorn's with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. She stepped forward and extended her hand in the formal manner appropriate for their public parting. "I thank you for your kindness, Bjorn Ironwolf," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion he could see in her face. "May the gods grant you victory in battle and wisdom in your choices." He took her hand briefly, feeling the softness of her palm for what he knew would be the last time. "May they grant you happiness and many strong children," he replied, speaking the traditional blessing for a new bride. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and shared memories. Then Erik stepped forward, gently placing a possessive hand on his wife's shoulder, and the spell was broken. "The day grows late," Erik announced to his men. "We should depart while the light is good." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Astrid was helped onto the sled beside Erik, her few personal possessions loaded around her. The warriors mounted their horses, and the small caravan formed up for departure. Magnus offered the traditional blessing for safe travel, and the settlement's inhabitants called out their farewells. As the party began to move toward the eastern path, Astrid turned back once to look at the place that had been her home for 3 winters. Her gaze found Bjorn among the crowd of well-wishers, and for a moment their eyes held across the distance. Then she lifted her hand in a final gesture of goodbye and turned away, facing toward her new life with determination that both broke his heart and made him proud of her strength. Bjorn watched until the last horse disappeared around the bend in the forest path, taking with it the woman who had shared his bed, his hearth, and his heart. The settlement felt suddenly empty, despite the presence of all his friends and comrades. Something vital had gone out of his world, leaving behind a silence that all the ale and companionship in Magnus's hall could not fill. That night, alone in his room for the first time in 3 years, Bjorn stared at the empty space where Astrid's belongings had been and wondered if he had made the greatest mistake of his life in letting her go. 2 years passed like seasons of grey fog for Bjorn Ironwolf. He threw himself into the life of a warrior with savage dedication, leading raids across the North Sea that brought great wealth to Magnus's coffers and enhanced his own reputation throughout the northern lands. His sword arm had never been stronger, his tactical mind never sharper, yet victory tasted like ash in his mouth. The other warriors spoke of his ferocity in battle with a mixture of admiration and concern. Where once he had fought with controlled skill, now he battled with the fury of a man who cared little whether he lived or died. He took risks that made seasoned veterans shake their heads, charging into enemy shield walls with berserker, rage that left enemies broken. But his comrades, worried for his sanity, "You fight like a man running from demons," his shield brother Olaf observed one evening, as they sailed homeward from a successful raid on the Frankish coast. "What spirits chase you that you cannot face them?" Bjorn said nothing, staring out at the dark waters that had become his refuge from thoughts too painful to bear. The sea demanded his complete attention, leaving no room for memories of golden hair and gentle laughter. In the chaos of battle, he could forget for precious moments that he had chosen sword and ship over hearth and home. Magnus watched his champion's self-destructive behavior with growing concern. Bjorn was too valuable to lose to his own recklessness, and too good a man to watch destroy himself over a woman who was now another man's wife. The Jarl had offered him his choice of unmarried women in the settlement, even suggesting alliances with neighbouring clans that could be sealed with marriage, but Bjorn showed no interest in any of them. News of Astrid reached him occasionally through the network of traders and travellers that connected the scattered settlements. She had given birth to Eric's son in her first year of marriage, a healthy boy who bore his father's name and would inherit his lands. The report spoke of her contentment, her skill in managing Eric's large household, and her growing influence as the Jarl's trusted wife. Each piece of news drove the knife of regret deeper into Bjorn's heart. She was living the life he could have given her, bearing the children he might have fathered, finding the security and purpose he had been too stubborn to provide. The knowledge that she was happy made his own misery both sharper and more shameful. The breaking point came during a raid on the Saxon coast in the second summer after her departure. Bjorn's reckless charge into an enemy position had been successful but costly, leaving 3 good warriors dead and himself nursing a deep sword cut across his ribs. As the surviving crew tended their wounds and counted their spoils on the beach, Magnus pulled his champion aside for a conversation that had been long overdue. "This cannot continue," the Jarl said bluntly. "You are one of my best warriors, but you fight like a man seeking death rather than victory. Your shield brothers whisper that you are cursed, that some witch has put evil on you." Bjorn winced as he shifted position, feeling the stitched wound pull against his ribs. "Let them whisper. My sword still serves you well. Your sword serves me, yes, but what of the man who wields it?" Magnus sat heavily on a piece of driftwood, his weathered face showing genuine concern. "You have been like a son to me since your father died. Bjorn, I will not watch you throw away your life over regrets that cannot be changed." The unexpected kindness in his Jarl's voice broke through Bjorn's carefully maintained defences. For the first time in 2 years, he felt the full weight of his loss pressing down upon him like a physical burden. "I let her go," he whispered, the words torn from his throat like a confession. "I had the chance to keep her, to offer her marriage and children and everything she wanted. Instead, I chose my freedom and my pride, and now she belongs to another man." Magnus nodded slowly, understanding at last the source of his champion's anguish. "Pride is a cold bedfellow, my friend. But it is not too late to find warmth elsewhere. How can I take another woman to my bed when every night I dream of golden hair and green eyes? How can I promise love to someone new when my heart still belongs to a ghost?" The older man was quiet for a long moment, watching the waves roll up the pebbly beach. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "Perhaps the problem is not that you remember her, but that you remember her wrong. In your mind, she has become perfect, untouchable, a treasure you lost, through your own foolishness. But she was flesh and blood, a real woman with real needs that you could not meet. She made the choice that was best for her, and you must make the choice that is best for you." As they sailed home across the grey waters of the North Sea, Bjorn found himself thinking not of Astrid, as she had been in their bed, but as she had been on that last morning, strong, determined, choosing her future with courage even though it meant leaving love behind. Perhaps it was time for him to show the same courage. 3 more years passed before fate brought Bjorn Ironwolf and Astrid together again. The occasion was the Great Winter Assembly at Trondheim, where Jarls from across Norway gathered to settle disputes, arrange marriages, and discuss matters of trade and war. Magnus had brought a large retinue, including his most trusted warriors, to negotiate territorial agreements with his eastern neighbours. Bjorn had changed in the years since Astrid's departure. Magnus's harsh wisdom had eventually taken root, and he had learned to channel his grief into purpose rather than reckless fury. He had taken a wife 2 winters past, a practical arrangement with Sigrid, the daughter of a neighbouring chieftain. She was a good woman who managed his household efficiently and had given him a daughter, though their marriage lacked the passionate bond he had once shared with another. The great hall at Trondheim buzzed with hundreds of voices speaking in various dialects, the air thick with smoke from the massive hearthfires needed to warm such a vast space. Bjorn was discussing grain prices with a trader from Denmark when he saw her across the crowded room, and the sight hit him like a physical blow. Astrid stood beside Eric, who was deep in conversation with several other Jarls. She wore the rich clothing befitting a noble woman, her golden hair now decorated with silver pins that marked her status as a mother of sons. The years had matured her beauty, adding dignity to her bearing and wisdom to her green eyes. At her side stood a boy of perhaps 4 winters, clearly Eric's son by his resemblance to the older man. For a moment, Bjorn felt the old pain rise in his chest like a tide, but it was different now, tempered by time and his own experiences. The desperate hunger that had consumed him for years had settled into something more like wistful regret, the way a man might remember a beautiful sunset without expecting to see it again. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, and he saw recognition flicker in her gaze. She spoke quietly to Eric, who glanced toward Bjorn and nodded his permission. Astrid made her way through the crowd, moving with the confidence of a woman secure in her position and purpose. "Bjorn Ironwolf," she said formally when she reached him, offering the slight bow appropriate for greeting a respected warrior. "I heard you had taken a wife. I hope she brings you happiness." "She is a good woman," he replied honestly, "and I see that motherhood suits you well. Your son is handsome and strong." A genuine smile crossed her face at the compliment. "Eric is very proud of him, and of our younger boy, who is with his nurse tonight. They are good sons, and they will inherit their father's lands without dispute." The practical satisfaction in her voice reminded him of the woman he had known, always thinking of security in the future. Yet there was something else there now, a contentment that spoke of deeper fulfillment than mere material success. "I am glad," he said, and found that he meant it. "You made the right choice." She studied his face carefully, perhaps looking for signs of the bitter regret that had once consumed him. "As did you, I think. Magnus tells Eric that you have become one of the most respected warriors in the Western Fjords. Your reputation has spread even to our lands." "Reputation is cold comfort on winter nights," he said with a slight smile, "but it feeds my family and secures my place in the world." A man cannot ask for more than that. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 people who had once shared everything, now separated by years and choices, yet still connected by memories that neither would trade away. "I have wondered," Astrid said quietly, "whether you ever regretted letting me go." Bjorn considered the question carefully before answering. "I regretted it for years," he admitted. "I thought I had lost the only happiness I would ever know. But time has taught me that we both chose according to our natures. You needed security and family, things I was not ready to provide. I needed freedom and adventure, things you could not share. We gave each other what we could when we could, and that was not nothing." Her eyes softened with what might have been relief or gratitude. "I loved you deeply, Bjorn. I want you to know that. Those 3 winters were not just convenience or protection for me." "Nor for me," he replied. "But love is not always enough to build a life upon. We both learned that lesson, painful as it was." Eric appeared at Astrid's shoulder, his presence commanding but not unfriendly. "My wife," he said simply, the words carrying both affection and authority. "The evening grows late, and our son grows restless." Astrid nodded to her husband, then turned back to Bjorn one last time. "May the gods grant you wisdom and courage in all your endeavors," she said, offering the formal farewell. "And may they grant you prosperity and joy in your children," he replied, as she walked away beside her husband, their son between them. Bjorn felt something settle in his chest that he had not experienced in 5 long years. It was not happiness exactly, but it was peace. The woman he had loved was content in her chosen life, and he had finally learned to be content in his. The great assembly continued around him, but Bjorn's attention had turned inward. Tomorrow he would return to his own settlement, to his practical wife and growing daughter, to his duties as Magnus's champion and his own modest holdings. It was not the life he had imagined in his youth, but it was a good life, earned through courage and sacrifice and the wisdom that comes only through loss. The boy he had been would have wept to see Astrid walk away again. The man he had become watched her go with gratitude for what had been and acceptance of what could never be.